I'll take note that Montsho needs to speak. I'll take note that Emmanuel still needs to speak. But perhaps in the interest of time, we can probably wrap up a little bit this session so that we move on to the next session, because the next session is speaking about the COVID responses that have been taking place at national level. And again, that means that national coalitions will come on again and really share briefly the key highlights of what has been happening. So allow me to wrap up this session and just also give a comment which I think is very key, to just ask whether there is any process within the national networks at national level, whether there's any process of reviewing the implementation of the African Charter at the national level. It would be interesting if there is any such review going on at the national level, because that would really bring about perhaps a research document or something that can then be used for advocacy purposes going on into the next period beyond the 30 years. That is a question that perhaps can be responded as we go on into the other discussions. I thought I would flag that out as an important issue. But thank you so much to the national networks that have presented. And I see a lot of issues coming out around how the constitutions have been aligned, how there is a lot of work that has been done around legislation alignment to the charter, but still some gaps in a lot of countries. And I think there's also a common concern around whether government is actually investing enough in terms of the national budgets to support children's rights. The aspect around monitoring of concluding observations also came out as a key issue that the civil society is working on, but also still a lot of concern around whether governments are actually serious about implementing the concluding observations. And also one aspect that came out is that there's been a general increase in terms of dialogue between the civil society and government. I heard Lesotho talk about that. I heard Botswana as well. I also heard Malawi talk about that, and even Zambia. So I think there's a lot that has been going on. But allow me at this point to hand over the time back to Felistus, who will take us to the next session where we are going to be discussing issues around COVID. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Felistus. Before you go, there are a couple of hands up, I think, from the question that you had asked earlier.
Okay. Can you let me know who wants to speak, or allow them to speak briefly before we proceed? Jennifer?
Okay, let me start with Desmond. Desmond?
Okay.
Desmond? Oh, Desmond? Okay, now hands are all coming up. Okay, Desmond is not there. Okay. Dr. Adai, but you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Two quick points. One is that first, to acknowledge the excellent presentations and the substantive presentations. My office has commissioned a study on the Charter at 30 that documents progress and unfinished agendas. So we'll share them with you for further dissemination to the CSOs. The messages are very strong and provide substantive advocacy issues that we can all use. Secondly, is to acknowledge that as a continent, we are not doing very well in terms of reporting to the Committee of Experts on Rights and Welfare of the Child. The rate of reporting is very low, we've summarized the state of reporting. We'll share them for sharing with others. But I'm hoping that as we begin to move forward, we'll explore how we can collectively work together to reverse this particular trend. The reporting trend on our continent is low. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Feli, please mute yourself.
Thank you very much for those comments. Very useful, especially around the continental issues of reporting to the committee. Thank you for that. I don't know whether there are still any more hands up. Jennifer, you can assist us so that we can...
I think there's Richard. I think Emmanuel is back, I think, for his presentation. Okay. Should we allow him before Richard speaks, or we do Emmanuel first?
We can do Emmanuel for the South Africa presentation briefly, okay. And then Richard, and then if Montsho is then able to speak, then those three should wrap up this session because we are running out of time.
Emmanuel, go ahead, please unmute yourself.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for the bit of a challenge. I'm not going to take long. And thanks for the opportunity as well. As indicated, we've started the initiative of forming the South African Child Rights Coalition. Save the Children, together with Give a Child a Family, took up that responsibility. And to date, we've got a steering committee that includes about 10 organizations that are going to lay out thoroughly the strategic direction that the coalition has to take, set up the building blocks and the foundations. And we intend to launch the coalition proper around towards the end of August. So that for us, it's quite an important imperative. But parallel to just forming the coalition, we are also equally building some advocacy work within the context of COVID. And I know you said we'd talk to COVID later on. But we're just getting the traction also during this current period in relation to COVID and our advocacy work. So we would want to look at several things things like education, given that children are going back to school, what are the implications and all that. And also we want to also explore looking at the regulations that are being promulgated almost every weekly within this space, and how do they really affect children, and what impacts are there on the rights of children. So that's about the coalition. And maybe just finally, because I think we don't have much time, South Africa has just finalized the National Plan of Action for Children 2019 to 2024, and it just needs to go through cabinet. Just before COVID, it was meant to go through cabinet, but then events overtook some of these things. But work is going on in terms of putting in place implementation mechanisms that are going to... One of the key things that we've identified is the capacity, the technical capacity of the officials in government to be able to really look at everything that they do with the child rights lens. So we want to build their capacity for them to understand and appreciate what is child rights within their spaces and all that, so that we could advance the overall agenda that is articulated both in the charter and also in the convention. So that is the major thing, getting this plan of action operationalized, and also on the side, particularly with things like the coalition, how do we monitor that the things that the commitments made in that plan are being realized? I think I'll leave it at that for purposes of time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for sharing that. And I noticed you also touched in around the COVID, although it's the next session coming up. Richard, I understand you had something to say, and I don't know whether Montsho is still able to speak. We are really behind time, and we need to somehow catch up. So, Richard, if you can briefly come in.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. Colleagues, thank you very much for the presentation that you've shared. I want to just submit my proposal in the question that has been shared. I think we really need to concretize and systematize this process of digital in terms of the shares, which we are celebrating the year. So my proposal based on what is presented, if you could really the identify about the 3 questions that will help us to take a step. What are the cases, so that also formulate our core advocacy. And I think what Dr. Edward has shared in terms of the report, I think it would be a missed opportunity if we cannot use this opportunity as Cso Forum to keep going and identify and use that. Submit a positive to the committee and to the blocks. The second thing I want to touch on, I think we are unconsciously silent about agenda for the future, which is the operationalization of the African future. And my proposal.
Sorry, Richard, to interrupt you, but the connection is not very good. I don't know about the others, but I can't really hear what you are saying.
Okay. I don't know why you lost me. The first thing the first thing of my submission was that we really need to sensitize. I mean, systematize the progress of our industry as the child is concerned. Maybe we should develop about 3 guiding questions so that all the national child networks could. Some of them have already that information, but that's the questions. The Secretary could share that, and then we document those key things that we have achieved, the gaps, and then use that to develop a policy. That's number 1. The second thing I'm saying, I think I've noted with great concern that there is a silence. Our silence is very loud when coming to Agenda 2040. Which is the way that the charter is somehow operationalized, those 10 aspirations. And my thinking is that maybe at some point we'll need to make a concerted effort to start to deliberate across all those 10 aspirations so that we can also start to advocate in our respective countries to ensure that as and when our countries report, they also make reference to those 10 aspirations because they are the only key players that will help us to translate the African Charter into a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's going to be difficult for me to comment because I didn't hear half of what you said. I heard the part about the Agenda 40, though. But I hope that we have all taken note of what he said. And I think as we go along now, if colleagues, you could just add any comments to the chat. We have a chat running there. If you can add any comments or any responses to what Richard has said and what other people have said, if you can add that to the chat, then we can be picking it up as we go along. And by saying that, I am being time conscious because our program is way behind. So can I hand over now to Felistus, who's going to be taking us through the aspect around the response to COVID-19.
Okay, thank you, Chenge, and thank you, colleagues, for the presentations. I think, like Richard has also made observations, it goes to show that perhaps even beyond ourselves, we also need to widely share the charter, and if we can get hold of that document by UNICEF as well, and see how best we can utilize that in our interventions. But overall, thank you so much for sharing and for giving us insights into how countries are actually faring in the 30 years of existence of this critical instrument. Having said that, I want to acknowledge Vian from World Vision. Vian, welcome to the session, and it's good to have you here. We are moving on and with speed to COVID-19. What we want to appreciate from your presentations is firstly whether you are involved in COVID, and if you are, what sort of interventions are you implementing, and your stakeholders, and perhaps top 3 or top 5 issues that you are seeing as a challenge or as issues that are affecting children on the ground. And we are going to start with the alphabetical order again. So we'll have, in the absence of Angola, we will have Botswana, and after Botswana, we will have Lesotho. After Lesotho, we will have we'll have Eswatini before Lesotho, and then Lesotho number 3. If we can take that order, colleagues. So once Botswana is done, Eswatini, please take over, and then Lesotho, and then we'll make the other 3 to go on. So Botswana, it's over to you. And let's also, if we can, we don't want to putting a gag on you, but if you can, let's also look on the issue of time as well. But we want to hear it all. Botswana?
Yes, can you hear me?
Please go ahead, Machete.
Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
We can hear you, Machete.
Okay, thank you so much, colleagues, and a very good morning to everybody. Botswana and our involvement in the COVID-19 response. Let me start off by giving a bit of context before going into what we've been doing over the past couple of months. In March 2020, Botswana registered its first 4 cases of COVID. Obviously, that also brought about a lot of anxieties, a lot of worries amongst the general population. It was at that point that we as civil society, in addition to several other stakeholders, that we started making calls for government to close the schools. Our position being that there was nothing that was in place in the schools to allow for our children in the schools to observe the preventative measures for transmission as was prescribed by the regulations there. Eventually, the government did accede to the request and calling for closure of schools in March 2020 for an indefinite period. In the same month, the president, in accordance with the Constitution of the Republic, declared a state of public emergency. Constitutionally, they can only do so for 21 days, nothing beyond that. And after the state of public emergency, Parliament further convened in April, where they extended the state of public emergency for a period of 6 months. That means it will be coming to an end in October 2020. Now, this was in addition to several other measures. It seems like the global measure for prevention is to lock people in their houses and to stay home. So obviously that the country then did
go into a lockdown phase where there was very minimal movement of people, both outside of their homes, except for the essential services. We were lucky, or rather, the government did be accommodative of civil society organizations, not exhaustively, but quite a number of activists and civil society organizations were to provide services during this period. Now, as civil society, when this for closure of schools, we also further initiated quite a number of initiatives working with the government very closely. Firstly, working with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Later on, working with the Ministry responsible for children, this local government and rural development, where we engaged in a three-pronged strategy. The first being public awareness, just raising awareness to members of the public